Welcome to Tartarian Tales 43, where I have found the Tartarian Tales, a book from 1785 by Thomas Simon Gillette. And he made Peruvian tales, China tales, and so I'm still torn whether these are fiction or reality, but I really am starting to think that they are based on truths, and maybe they're a little bit elaborated on, but I think they're based on stories and writings, and it says translated from something else. So it's been, I mean, he wrote it probably in French, I think, originally, and it has some cool artwork. It's got some great stories in it, and I wanted to share it. I tried to find a section that I thought you all would like that wasn't too long and had some good information on it, so we will see how this one works. There's mention of Solomon, there's kings, there's princes, there's murder. It's pretty intense. I think you guys are going to like it. And so first I'm going to show the text, and then after that I'll show some crazy art, some buildings, some art from the book, and whatever else I can find to add to this, maybe some of my art, who knows. But I found a chapter called The History of Badour the Peaceful, King of Cayor with a C, which is a kingdom of the Indies beyond the Ganges. So it's apparently Tartarian territory, and these are princes and princesses of the Tartary region. So let's hear what happens here. This is quite a story. Here we go, the original Tartarian Tales. The History of Badour, the Peaceful, King of Cayor. I was born the sovereign of Cayor, a kingdom not very extensive, and my ambition never prompted me to enlarge it, being more desirous to live in unity with my neighbors than to run the hazard of destruction by undertaking unjust wars, for which reason I was called Badour the Peaceful. In my youth I wedded the princess of Zayd, whom you here behold. She brought me several children, and among the rest a son and a daughter, both born the same day. I named my son Abu Zayd and my daughter Dejara. I mention these two first, though they were not my eldest, nay, were born to me even at the time when Zayd had no further hopes of being any more a mother, but because these have happily made amends for all the bitterness with which their brothers had dashed the tranquility of my life. Of my other two sons, one was called Salek the Violent because of the excesses he daily ran into. I cannot imagine from whom he derived that humor. In all probability the gods sent him to us, together with his brother, to make a trial of our virtue. The other was named Azem. His manners were not very different from those of Salek, and their joint inclination for evil united them so to each other that they were never asunder. I every day received some fresh complaint of their ill behavior, and if they had been private persons, I should 1,000 times have made them an example to my people, to whom they were become odious by their crimes. But the tenderness of a father stayed my hand. At length they grew so weary of my continual remonstrances that they both resolved to be gone from my court, and I blessed the hour wherein they executed that design. They had now been gone for above 4 months, and I began to think myself happy in being freed from their presence, when I was struck with the most cruel blow that is possible for their father to feel. Gu Belarau, the princess of Nangan, which is a city on the river Chang, is the province of Quanxi in China, was lately married to Rusang Gehun. That prince was not young, but his agreeable, complacent temper made amends for the merit which age had deprived him of, and he lived with his wife in so perfect a union that he was an example to all his subjects. Salek and his brother passed through the dominions of this monarch. They were received with a great deal of distinction. Rufang Gahun even lodged them in his own palace for several days, but his imprudence in suffering them too often to see the beautiful Guhelaru cost him his life. Salek became excessively enamored of that princess. He was too well acquainted with her virtue to hope that she would ever reward his unlawful ardor. But being very little accustomed to overcome his passions, he resolved to gratify them at any rate, and to effect this, he hatched the blackest design that can be imagined, and prevailed upon his brother Azem to lend him a helping hand in the execution of it. One evening, as they were walking with the king of Nangan and his spouse in a wood which was at the end of the gardens of the palace, they suddenly fell upon that prince, who had only a little saber by his side, and their fury not giving him time to put himself in a posture of defense, they stabbed him 20 times with their poniards, and either out of contempt or cruelty, left the odious instruments of their guilt sticking in the bloody corpse of that unfortunate king. Guhelaru made such cries as reached even to heaven, but those barbarians seized her, and having got out into the open fields by a door which they had secured by means of the eunuch that guarded it, and whom they had corrupted, they used all their endeavors to set her upon one of their horses, which they had before prepared, when about 20 soldiers of the king's guard, alarmed by Gubhelaru's outcries, came to the place. This unexpected assistance struck terror into Salak and Azem. They were forced to abandon the queen and betake themselves to flight. They were pursued, but in vain. They were well mounted, and made their escape, carrying with them the eunuch who had favored them in the execution of their infamous design. It is impossible to express the affliction of Gubhelaru. Her complaints pierced the very skies. She caused the bloody corpse of her husband to be carried away, and instead of observing all the funeral ceremonies that are used in China, she only embalmed it with her own hands, and had it put into a coffin of gold, which she adorned with the most precious of her jewels. She likewise deposited in the coffin his bloody shirt and the poniards with which he was assassinated, and afterwards took a solemn oath between the hands of the bonzes to revenge her husband's death, not only upon the murderers, but upon all their families. She afterwards set out incognito with Prince Kiahia, her brother, and 12 slaves, all resolved to sacrifice themselves for her service. My sons did not expect a fury like this. Without the least remorse for what they had done, they minded nothing but flying away from a country which they knew was filled with aversion against them. But they did not carry their crime very far. At some days' journey from the place where they had committed it, Salak's horse fell and broke his rider's leg, and his brother Azem, being gone to the next town to get some speedy succor for him, that wretch was carried into a neighboring house. Gubhelaru, who, without losing a moment's time, pursued the murderers, as it were, by the scent, came by chance to that very house. She knew nothing of Salak's being so near her, but after having made a slight repast, looking into the coffin of gold according to her custom to renew her cruel vow, she was in the utmost surprise to see several drops of blood issue from her husband's body. "Just heaven!" cried the princess. "The murderers must be somewhere in this place." Then rising from the table like a madwoman, she took in each hand one of the poniards which with Rufang Gahun had been stabbed, and having searched most part of the house with her brother and the 12 slaves, she came at last into the chamber where Salak was reposing himself. The sight of him transported her with rage. "Traitor," cried she, "it is full time thou wert punished for the execrable crime thou hast committed upon my husband. The slowest and most violent torments were too little for such a villain as thou art, but my revenge could not be entirely satisfied if I deferred it a moment, or committed the care of it to any other but myself." Then, without giving him time to make any answer to these reproaches, which were but too just, she plunged her dagger into his heart 1,000 times, and after having caused his head to be cut off and exposed his body to the vultures, she went out of that house, leaving the master of it terrified at her cruelty. As she was informed by him that my other son was gone to the next town, and that, upon his not coming so soon, he was expected, the impatient Salak had sent a slave that he had to fetch him. She took the road that they were to come, and having met with them in a little wood where they must necessarily be obliged to pass, she gave the unfortunate Azem the same treatment as she had given his brother, and put to death the traitorous eunuch, accomplice of their crime, by the most exquisite torments. I was as much surprised as disturbed at hearing this sorrowful news. Whatever tenderness I had for my children, I could not blame Gubhelaru's revenge, but I almost died with grief at the sight of their bloody heads, which she sent me in a box, with a letter full of threats to destroy me in the same manner with the rest of my family. Abu Zayd, the only son that was left me, was as much concerned as myself at the death of his brothers. "My lord," said he to me, "the enemy we have to deal with is an irritated woman, who will attack us by craft and subtlety. Give me leave to take care of your life and that of the queen, and let me endeavor to defend you from a danger which makes me tremble both for you and her." "My grief was so excessive," continued Badour, "that it deprived me of the use of my senses." "Do whatever you think proper," said I. "My dear Abu Zayd, for my part I will retire into the recesses of my palace, there to bemoan incessantly the ill actions of your brothers, and pray the gods to forget them." I afterwards doubled my guard, and shut myself up in the innermost parts of my palace, with the queen, my spouse, accompanied only by 3 or 4 of the principal men of my court, who would not leave me in my affliction. My son, after having prepared everything that was necessary for the journey he meditated, accosted the Princess Dejara. "My dear sister," said he to her, You are not ignorant to what a pitch the fury of Guhelaru is raised. Our lives are not in safety here. Let us go together to seek for the means of preserving the king and queen from her cruel menaces. The famous genius Giancha, protector of the unfortunate, dwells in a magnificent palace, which is at the foot of the famous mountain Jubal Asumun. I have taken a resolution, while my father is shut up in his palace, to go and implore the succor of that king of the genii. Let us set forwards, therefore, my dear Dejara, and under habits that may disguise our quality, let us try to obtain a remedy for the evils which our unhappy brothers have brought upon our heads. Abu Zayd and Dejara, before they departed, embraced us tenderly. After above a month's traveling, they arrived in a vast champaign country, interspersed with a great number of little streams. As the heat was very excessive, and they perceived at some distance a wood of a pretty large extent, they made to it, and reposed themselves there in the cool shade with 2 slaves, which was all the train they had with them, when they heard a frightful noise, as of a great rock tumbling from the top of a high hill. They looked all around them to see what it was occasioned this noise, but when they were advanced farther into the wood, they found that it proceeded from a sort of a cistern, covered with a small stone, and sealed at each corner with a seal, whereon was stamped the name of the great Solomon. Immediately the horrible noise, which at first amazed them, began to diminish, and was succeeded by the following complaints. Perfidious Zelulau, traitorous genius, dost thou abuse the seal of Solomon to detain me a prisoner in this place? And must the unfortunate Giancha be long enclosed in the bowels of the earth, without having deserved so hard a fate? At the name of Giancha, my children leaped for joy. King of the genii, cried out Abu Zayd, here is a prince who would succor you at the expense of his life, and let me know how it is to be done. All thou hast to do, said the imprisoned genius, is to get up this stone by taking away as artificially as possible the print of the seal of the great Solomon. Abu Zayd, transported with joy, took off the seal without breaking it, as the genius had expressly ordered him. A thick smoke in a moment rose up to the clouds, and extending itself over the cistern, made so dark a fog that the prince and princess could not see one another. The darkness which all of a sudden covered the wood very much frightened the prince and princess, but the fog soon afterwards reunited into a solid body, out of which was formed the genius. Abu Zayd and Dejara immediately threw themselves at Giancha's feet. We were going even to seek you in your palace, said the prince, my son. I hoped, O powerful king of the genii, that without being subject to the fatal effects of the mountain Jubal Afumun, the gate would have been opened to me by virtue of the secret words which I formerly learned of the Jog Kaichokea, and without which all that have the boldness to come near it are sure to fall into a distemper more terrible than death itself. I praise God, interrupted the genius, for having brought you to this place, to restore me the liberty which the perfidious Zelulau had for these 12 years past deprived me of by the blackest piece of malice that has ever was heard. But I will not be ungrateful for the inestimable service you have done me. That wicked genius, continued Giancha, to be revenged upon me for destroying, so often as I do, the unjust projects he forms against your young princes and princesses, whom he persecutes for nothing but his cruel diversion, carried on his design in this manner. As she knows that his power is very much inferior to mine, he, by some subtle tricks or other, stole from the good King Ziph the ring of the mighty Solomon, when that prince used for the benefit of mankind, or which that prince used for the benefit of mankind. And being master of this treasure, he came to me, asked me pardon for all the uneasiness he had given to the persons I protected, and begged me to grant him my friendship, with protestations so sincere in appearance that I could not tell how to refute it him. After our reconciliation, we took a walk together in this wood, when having insensibly drawn me towards this place, he sat him down upon the side of the cistern. Then the traitor, who designed nothing but to circumvent me, having desired to see a carcanet of diamonds which I wore round my neck, let it fall into the cistern as he was pretending to return it to me. I immediately threw myself into the cistern to fetch out my carcanet. This was what the wretch wanted. He took advantage of this moment, covered the cistern with that stone, and fastened it with the seal of the great Solomon. I leave you to judge how much I was astonished at this stratagem, continued Giancha. The useless efforts I made to get out of my prison convinced me that there was but one power so superior as to be strong enough to detain me, and this place is so much out of the way that I supposed I should have stayed here for several ages. But since I am obliged to you for so unlocked for a freedom, you may assure yourself, Prince, that my gratitude shall have no bounds. The genius, continued Badour, having given my son to understand that he was not ignorant of the cause of his journey, offered him the assistance he wished for. The death of your brothers was just, said he, and Guheleru ought, indeed, to sacrifice no less than those murderers to the manes of her husband. But I will moderate the sharp resentment she is actuated by, and from this moment you need no longer be apprehensive of that princess's fury. Then, having replaced the stone upon the mouth of the cistern, he again fixed upon it the print of Solomon's seal, that Zelulu might not be sensible of his being at liberty, and having by his power formed in it a noise like that which he made there in the time of his restraint, he embraced the prince and princess, and conveying them through the air with extreme rapidity, set them down in a charming meadow which was on the frontiers of my dominions. I will not leave you, said he to them, till I have made you happy, but as I must hide myself from the traitor Zelilou in order to get from him the ring of Solomon, I will not appear to you in my proper shape. I will contract myself into so small a bulk that the beautiful Dejara shall be able to carry me easily by her side, and you need only to wish that I would resume my former shape and obey your orders, and it is done that moment. Then the genius, having dissipated himself into smoke, the princess, my daughter, found at her feet a golden box, which hung in a chain of the same metal. She immediately opened it, and was in the utmost surprise to see in it, through a crystal, several springs, which performed all the internal functions of the human body. She tied it to her side. The genius, continued Badour, had given my children magnificent clothes and ordered them to conceal their quality no longer. They had already passed through some towns of my kingdom, when one evening, being come to a sort of village where the approaching night obliged them to stop, they knocked at the door of the house which had the best appearance there. They were very well received by the master of it, but just as they were entering into the chamber that was prepared for them, 3 Chinese cavaliers would have taken possession of it for a lady who was at the gate in a palanquin. My son had no sooner discovered himself to be the Prince of Caor, but the 3 men yielded him the place, went out of the house, and carried the lady to another lodging. My children, after a slight supper, went to bed, and sleep now reigned profoundly in their chamber, when the very same Chinese cavaliers, the Princess Guheleru, who was the lady in the palanquin, her brother, and all her servants, came to the door of the house where Abu Zayd and Dejara were buried in repose. She had been transported with joy when she heard they were so near her, but being willing to stay till they were asleep, it was not till she judged they were so that she knocked at the door of the house where they were. The master of the house had no sooner opened the door to them than he found a dagger at his throat, with menaces of stabbing him that moment if he made the least noise. We had no design, said Guheleru to him, upon any but 2 perfidious wretches who are lodged in your house, and give themselves out for the children of the king of Caor. Deliver them up to our revenge, or thou diest this instant. The host, terribly frightened, was forced to show them the chamber of Abu Zayd and Dejara, deploring in his heart the miserable fate he saw they were going to endure. The Queen of Nangan pursued Badour, as she has since contested to me, made terrible reflections in that moment. She was filled with remorse against the injustice of the action she was committing. But forget that thou art a woman, said she to herself, or at least remember that thou art an offended woman. Then, having given one of her poniards to Kiahia, and armed herself with the other, they entered into my children's apartment, and though with a trembling hand they were just going to execute their cruel resolution, yet when each of them cast their eyes upon the persons they were to destroy, they found their arms held back by a superior power. Never was Guheleru so struck as when she considered the regularity of Abu Zayd's features, and the charms of the Princess of Caor so dazzled the eyes of Kiahia, who was going to pierce her heart, that the poniard fell out of his hand. Guheleru was somewhat longer before she yielded, but the genius Giancha, who was watchful for the preservation of my children, having entirely touched the heart of the Queen of Nangan, she waked the prince, my son. "Return thanks," said she, "to the secret power that disarms me. The desire of revenge is quite vanished away from me, and I find my heart relent in the very moment when I least looked for such a change." Then turning to her brother, "As for you," said she, "my dear Kiahia, I am sensible that the extreme beauty of the princess has made a strong impression upon your soul. How glad I am to find this happy sympathy between us. I should have died with grief if you had executed one part of our unjust resolve, and I begin to feel that I was pushing my cruelty too far. The real criminals are punished. The death of my husband is sufficiently revenged." Dejara awaked in this moment. She was frightened at seeing so many people in her chamber. "Powerful king of the genii," cried she, "come speedily to our assistance." She had no sooner pronounced these words than the gold box opened of itself. The chamber was filled with obscurity, which, dissipating by degrees, exposed to sight the formidable Giancha. This sudden aid struck terror into Guhelaru and Kiahia. They began to be afraid for their own lives, when the genius encouraged them with extraordinary kindness. "Forget, madam," said Giancha to Guhelaru, "forget the death of a husband whom you have sufficiently revenged. Let Abu Zayd and Dejara be the bonds of an eternal peace between your families, and let the field of battle be turned into the nuptial bed." Guhelaru was at first so surprised at the sight of the redoubtable genius that she scarce heard what he said to her, but Abu Zayd, who was that instant struck with the splendor of her charms, throwing himself at her feet, "Suffer your heart to be touched, madam," said he to her with a submissive air. "I shall esteem myself the happiest of mortals in my cards, my respect, and the most tender love, in my cares, my respect, and the most tender love, can one day prevail upon you to give me the place of a prince whom you have indeed the greatest reason to bewail." Guhelaru now began to be moved, continued Badour. She lifted up Abu Zayd and Dejara, persuaded by the passionate expressions of Prince Kiahia, gave him to understand that she should not oppose me, if I consented to this marriage. The genius, having then commanded the 4 new lovers and all their attendants to take hold of his mantle, he transported them in a moment into my palace, where at length, after the Queen of Nangan had its apart from some time for the decency of her widowhood, she married Abu Zayd. In the same day Kiahia became the husband of the princess, my daughter. This double marriage restored my heart to its former tranquility, and it gave me so much joy to see my family again settled in peace, that for fear my repose should again be disturbed by some new accident, I resolved with the queen, my spouse, to retire into this rural palace, built by the potent Giancha, and here, free from the troubles of grandeur, and under the protection of that king of the genii, who was gone to an invisible island to wait for a fair opportunity of revenging himself upon the traitor Zelulau, the queen and I enjoy a quiet, peaceable state of life. So very interesting. Is this one of the first stories of genies? Is this like the predecessor to Aladdin and all these other Disney things, which seem to always kind of put these old tales and remake these old tales with new histories and new truths behind them, so that future generations are perpetually deceived into knowing what really happened in the past? It seems like it. I don't know, or maybe this was a partial true story that got embellished over time, and maybe there was a murder, and they ended up falling in love, and the only way that they could attribute it to it was a genius or a magical thing, or were the genie a particular type of people. I wouldn't really put anything past the past, because I have no idea what happened in the past. I know there was some magical things beyond what our humanity in present time period allow us to think is possible. I know that in the past these things were possible, and it's shown by the art, the structures, the architecture, everything. So I really can't put anything past or whatever. There could have been people made out of smoke in the past. Anymore, I am willing to believe anything, and whether it's true or not, I never take it as a full, wholehearted truth. I just kind of leave it as a potential. And maybe there's some truth to this, maybe there's none, but there's a lot of different cool parts and a lot of different aspects of the culture of this time period that seem very nice and seem very interesting. And in general, the story is kind of an interesting story. Don't get too, there's a lesson behind it. Don't get too caught up in revenge. Eye for an eye, but only to a certain point. This love can take over, and this peaceful king that really kind of wanted peacefulness was able to bear 2 sons that were pure evil, And it's a lot of different interesting themes. The whole Solomon, the seal, and the cistern. I'm always confused at what cistern's purposes were in the past, and if we know about their true purpose or if they were something else. But the seal of Solomon placed on it, very interesting. I know different things about Solomon, but I'm not sure what's true or not. I have really no idea, so that's why I look to you all for some insight in the comments. I'd love to see what you all are thinking about this story. Is it real? Whatever. Either way, it's a good, interesting story. I could see them making a movie about it now or something. Bring back these Tartarian tales. It would be a cool kind of production if it was possible, and to help bring this thought back into the collective in an interesting way. It seems like a lot of pop culture uses these stories from the past and just kind of repurposes them, like they do with a lot of things that they don't want you to know about. They kind of put things out, disguise ancient truths as kind of modern myths and different things. So who knows what their true methods are. But some interesting art, some interesting architecture, and just Tartarian tales. Just the fact that this book exists is mind-blowing to me. I think I first saw it when someone posted it on Reddit, and I was just blown away that, because it sounds great. Tartarian Tales is a great phrase. It's a great title, and it's good that someone else used it and I was on the kind of same page. And I definitely hadn't seen it before coming up with this video series, which I do find interesting. Maybe I tapped into the source and just kind of thought of it, but who knows. But these cool artwork, the story, I definitely check out more of the book. There's more to be read in there, and maybe I'll pluck from it again if I'm ever kind of in the mood to go down this potential fiction thing. I do like to deal with the parts that seem a little more true, but still you can learn a lot from stories, because a lot of the customs and different methods of the time period are preserved in it, and you have to read a little into it, but it's worth it sometimes. So, hope you all enjoyed this. I'll bust out some more Tartarian tales soon, and enjoy this double-headed eagle and how to make it, looks like. Very cool artwork. Amazing. Bless you all. Let's keep diving into the past in hopes of saving our future.